Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 40 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation F.L.U.S.H. We begin this segment at Mr. Boss's house, where we see Mr. Boss, Mr. Wink, Mr. Fibb, Knightbrace, and the crazy old cat lady have gathered together for a meeting. Mr. Wink and Mr. Fibb have stolen blueprints of the Sector V Treehouse, which is part of Mr. Boss's latest plan. A plan that involves these 5 adult villains taking over the Sector V Treehouse for themselves. Suddenly, someone arrives at the door and proceeds to ring the doorbell continuously. The 5 adult villains proceed to hide and wait until whoever is at the door leaves. Eventually, whoever is at the door stops ringing the doorbell, so Mr. Boss decides to check and see if this individual is still around. So when Mr. Boss opens the blinds of the window, he and the rest of the adult villains present, for that matter, see that the individual is still present, and this individual is none other than the Toilenator. Now that the Toilenator knows that they're inside, Mr. Boss begrudgingly lets the Toilenator inside. And the Toilenator explains that he believes that there was an error with the message he received about the meeting. He says that the Toilenator says that the message he received said that the meeting would take place at the Antarctic Iceberg Inn. So he actually called the inn to see if there really was a meeting there, and the inn staff members confirmed that there wasn't a meeting. So that's how the Toilenator figured to come to Mr. Boss's house. And the other adult villains present are irritated by this because they purposefully had the wrong location on that message, hoping that the Toilenator would not show up. But the Toilenator remains clueless to this detail. So the Toilenator inquires the rest of the adult villains present about their latest plan and what part he can play in this plan. But the other present adult villains insist that the Toilenator not take part in this particular plan because they comment about how he has a track record of being fooled by the kids next door. They bring up an example where the Toilenator let number 1 into a secret adult villain meeting or a secret adult villain hideout when number 1's only disguise was a t-shirt that said, "I'm not number 1. And the Toilenator's reason for being fooled by this, in his words, was that he didn't expect an article of clothing to lie. And this highlights to the other villains, the other villains present use this to illustrate their point that the Toilenator is very gullible. The crazy old cat lady actually refers to the Toilenator by his first name, Lou. Mr. Boss finally says that their plan doesn't involve a villain who always gets fooled by the kids next door, and he also refers to the Toilenator as soggy, and this really upsets the Toilenator. So in order to placate the Toilenator, Mr. Boss tells the Toilenator that he can help out by bringing the rest of them decaf coffee. The Toilenator is happy about this, and he assures them that he won't fail in his part of the plan. So the Toilenator heads for the toilet in Mr. Boss's bathroom, and he heads to the coffee shop that way. Yes, the Toilenator has the ability to transport to different locations by toilet. Now that the Toilenator is gone, the rest of the adult villains present decide that now is their chance to set their plan into motion before the Toilenator returns. Meanwhile, the Toilenator arrives at the coffee shop and he makes the order for the other 5 adult villains. The employee of the coffee shop, however, makes a comment about how the Toilenator... the employee of the coffee shop makes a comment about how the Toilenator is, in his words, stuck getting coffee for the real villains, and this angers the Toilenator quite a bit. He says that he will prove how worthy of a villain he is by single-handedly... the Toilenator says that he will prove how much of a villain he is by finishing off the Sector V operatives by himself. And he starts to imagine how good this will be, because the Toilenator thinks that not only will this lead to Mr. Boss and the others appreciating him as a villain, but he also thinks that this means that Mr. Boss and the others will invite him to join them when they go bowling on Tuesdays. The coffee shop employee is still not impressed, and he fills out the order and says how much it will cost. And it's a very large amount of money, to say the least. Meanwhile, just outside of the Uno home and the Sector V Treehouse, we see Mr. Boss, Mr. Wink, Mr. Fibb, Knightbrace, and the crazy old cat lady have set their plan into motion. Knightbrace disables the security alarms of the Sector V Treehouse. Mr. Wink and Mr. Fibb destroy Hippie Hop, and the crazy old cat lady uses her cat army to scare away the hamsters of the Sector V Treehouse. So after all the security measures have been taken care of, Mr. Boss places a flag with a logo that resembles himself holding the earth. Yes, he sets this flag inside the central control room of the Sector V Treehouse and declares the treehouse theirs. Meanwhile, we head to the Toilenator's house, which seems to be located near an abandoned playground because there is a swing set just outside of the Toilenator's house. But in any case, inside the house, the Toilenator is suiting up for his plan to take on the Sector V operatives by himself. He wears toilet armor, and he gathers several weapons such as toilet plungers, toilet scrubbers, and toilet cakes. And once he's gathered up all of his equipment for this mission, the Toilenator enters the golden toilet in his house to transport himself to the Sector V Treehouse. But then he gets stuck in the middle of the transportation process, and he has to use a plunger on himself to complete the transportation process. Back at the Sector V Treehouse, Mr. Boss is seen wearing one of Number One's sunglasses, and he insists that as the leader, he gets Number One's room, which annoys Knightbrace, who said he called dibs on Number One's room. So Knightbrace says he'll take Number Four's room, so he heads off to Number Four's room. We also see that Mr. Wink and Mr. Fibb are playing with Number Three's rainbow monkeys, and Mr. Wink is wearing Number Five's hat, or a copy of Number Five's hat anyway. Suddenly, though, the Toilenator arrives in a rather dramatic manner because he gives himself a rather intimidating voice as he's making a... Yes, he has an intimidating voice as he's giving an intimidating speech about how he will defeat the Sector V operatives. But when the Toilenator makes himself known physically, the rest of the adult villains calm down. But they soon realize that the Toilenator thinks that they are the Sector V operatives. Mr. Boss clarifies that he's Mr. Boss, not Number One, but the Toilenator actually still doesn't believe him because the Toilenator remembers the earlier comments they made about Number One's paper-thin disguise. So the Toilenator simply thinks that Mr. Boss is Number One in disguise, and he proceeds to knock out Mr. Boss. He thinks Mr. Fibb and Mr. Wink are Number 3 and Number 5, and he knocks them out too. He thinks the crazy old cat lady is Number 2, and he knocks her out as well. So Knightbrace comes out of Number 4's room, inquiring about all the noise, and naturally the Toilenator mistakes Knightbrace for being Number 4, and the Toilenator even refers to Number 4 as, in his words, his greatest nemesis. So after the Toilenator renders Knightbrace unconscious, the Toilenator gloats about how he defeated the Sector V operatives and he did it all before 3 o'clock p.m. And this confuses the Toilenator because he figures that the Sector V operatives should be in school right now. Suddenly, the Sector V operatives do arrive into the treehouse, and number one comments about how they just got out of class not too long ago. The Toilenator looks around and realizes that the adult villains he defeated were in fact the adult villains, and he also realizes that he forgot to bring the coffee. So the Sector V operatives proceed to beat up the Toilenator, and then they send him out of the treehouse by flushing him through the toilet. The Toilenator pops out of a sewer pipe. Yes, the Toilenator pops out of a sewer pipe, and then he becomes unconscious after he falls into the water just outside of the sewer pipe. And that's how we end this segment. So there you go. This was the B segment for the Season 4 premiere of Codename Kids Next Door. And this segment stands out because this segment actually features the villains as the viewpoint characters. Yes, some of the villains are the viewpoint characters for this particular segment, the Toilenator in particular. Tom Warburton did comment on one of his blog posts that they did want to give an entry to the Toilenator so that the Toilenator could have a chance to claim a victory, even if it was at the expense of other adult villains. Oh, and in a different blog post, Tom Warburton commented about how he and the rest of the staff and crew members of the show made a point to try and portray the adult villains as even more childish than the kids that they went up against. And he did bring up Mr. Boss wanting number one's room when Knightbrace called dibs on it as an example in this particular segment. So yes, the Toilenator got to be the spotlight character for this particular entry, and this helps to highlight just how far the Toilenator has become, because in a different blog post, Tom Warburton did admit that the Toilenator was originally just going to be a one-off villain, but he ended up being popular enough to become one of the more frequent appearing villains in the series, and also the most prevalent joke villain, or yes, the most frequent joke villain of the series. And otherwise, yes, I guess because this is a spotlight appearance for the Toilenator, I might as well bring up, or actually I should mention this detail first. Yes, this detail, or this segment also shows an example of continuity within the series, besides the major storylines, because the Toilenator describes number 4 as his greatest nemesis in his words. And this is calling back to Operation Movie from Season 2, where the Toilenator was fooled by number 4's disguise and thought number 4 was his new friend, and number 4 ended up ruining the Toilenator's plan, which got the other adult villains to respect him. So yes, this is calling back to that detail about how the Toilenator views number 4 as his archenemy, and whether or not number 4 returns the feelings is a different matter. While some fans would argue that the Toilenator as number 4's archenemy is one-sided on the Toilenator's part, there is another villain who could also be seen as another archenemy of number 4. And that particular villain actually will appear in Season 4, so we'll cross that bridge when we eventually get to it. But yes, now that I mentioned number 4 being viewed as an archenemy to the Toilenator, I think I might as well bring up this detail. This was from one of the comic issues of Codename Kids Next Door. And because the comic issues are pretty short, and because it's not really brought up in the actual series itself, I thought I might as well bring this up. So, in the comics issue known as Operation History, spelled with an I-E rather than a Y, that comics issue actually reveals how the Toilenator became the Toilenator, and reveals his full name to be Lou Pottingsworth III, if I remember correctly. But the big reveal happens at the end of this comics issue, which reveals that the Toilenator is actually number 4's uncle. And he's actually, yes, the Toilenator is actually the long-lost twin brother of number 4's dad. And that comics issue also mentions that number 4's dad's first name is Sydney. So yes, Sydney Beetles and the Toilenator are long-lost twin brothers. Now, yeah, and because they do describe the Toilenator as a long-lost twin brother to Sydney, that seems to explain why the Toilenator has a different last name instead of the Beetles' last name. I interpreted that as because of, yes, I interpreted the long-lost twin brother part as Lou was probably adopted into another family that had the last name Pottingsworth. So that's my speculation, and other fans as well. Yes, many fans, myself included, speculate that Lou having a different last name from Sydney is because he was probably adopted by someone who had the last name Pottingsworth. So yes, that's a small by-the-way detail, and yeah, it's not actually brought up in the series itself, but yes, the Toilenator is actually number 4's uncle and Sydney Beetle's twin brother. And funny enough, this isn't the only time where a Kids Next Door operative, a Sector V operative in particular, has an uncle as a member of the Rogues Gallery. And those of you who have seen a certain entry will know what I'm talking about. But for those of you just following along with the Recap and Thoughts video, rest assured that will be made more clear later on once we reach that particular entry's Recap and Thoughts video. Otherwise, yes, Crazy Old Cat Lady is featured as one of the prevalent villains of this segment, and this kind of highlights how the Crazy Old Cat Lady became a little more villain-like compared to her initial appearance, where she initially was antagonistic towards the Kids Next Door because of a misunderstanding. But here, and in later entries, she's portrayed more as a more obviously a villain, yes. And besides that, this segment, and Season 4 for that matter, starts a trend where at the end of the episode of Season 4, Season 5, and Season 6, the end credits aren't the usual end credits. The credits play on one side of the screen, and the other side of the screen features a scene. So in the case of this segment, the scene featured with the end credits was the Sector V operatives beating up the Toilenator and sending him out of the treehouse through the toilet. So I'll be mentioning these end credit scenes as part of the recap section of these videos, just as a heads up for future Recap and Thoughts videos for the rest of Codename Kids Next Door. And otherwise, yes, I believe that's about it for this particular segment. So we did get a segment that featured the Toilenator as the spotlight character, and it helps to highlight how the Toilenator became much more, or yes, the Toilenator became an ascended extra compared to what he was originally intended to be in the series. And we also did get to see, and we also did get to see some other adult villains in a prevalent role as well. And this won't be the only time where the Toilenator ends up ruining the plans of other adult villains. We'll be sure to cover those entries later on in the future. But otherwise, yes, I believe that's about it. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment of episode 40 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.